Hey friends, thanks so much for stopping by. I really appreciate it. Today, I'm sharing some of my favorite summer DIYs. I made a similar video last year, uploaded it, and somehow it's disappeared off my channel. So I made a new one. I really hope you enjoy it, and let's get busy. I'm starting my Bumblebee hanging basket by using one of the children's totes from the Dollar Tree. And I'm removing both of the handles. There's a little daisy on one side, and I removed that as well. I might use it in a future project. I could only find white at my Dollar Tree, and I needed to have a darker background, so I'm painting mine with some golden brown acrylic paint. You can pretty much use any brown paint, and if you have spray paint, that would work great too. You don't have to paint the back, and I just used it to wipe off the excess paint from my brush. Now that it has a complete coat, the white won't show through my burlap covering. To cover it, I'm using this Bumblebee print burlap, and I found this at the Dollar Tree. It's a large piece of fabric, and I used my iron to press out those fold lines. I'm placing the tote down on the wrong side of the burlap. I'm then cutting a piece of fabric large enough to wrap around the tote. I added some hot glue to the top inside of the tote, and then folded over and attached my burlap. I made sure to use a finger protector while I was doing this because the burlap is porous and the hot glue seeps out, so you could definitely burn yourself. I then added some hot glue to the back and folded the two sides under. I used Bumblebee burlap for this project, but you can use plain as well. Now that the fabric is wrapped around the inside edges, I'm gluing down both sides. I added some hot glue to the bottom of the tote, and now I'm attaching the burlap and I'm trying to follow the same shape. I'm adding hot glue and I'm folding it up, and it's not going to look so pretty on the back, but it will look great on the front. I added the same burlap onto the back to clean it up a bit and to hide the edges from my first piece. I cut a piece large enough to cover the back and then glued it in place. With that complete, I want to give the front a finished edge, and I'm using some of this 1 1/4 inch honeycomb ribbon that I found at the Dollar Tree. I wrapped it around the basket and then cut it to size. I matched the end of the ribbon to the top of the basket and attached it in place using 3 dots of hot glue. I then turned it over and attached the ribbon to the back. To support the back of my basket, I'm using one of the cutting boards from the Dollar Tree, but you can always use some heavy cardstock or any type of wood you have on hand. For my hanger, I'm using some of the nautical rope from the Dollar Tree. I first placed the cutting board into my basket and then placed in the rope to decide how long I wanted my hanger to be. To attach all 3 pieces together, along with my glue gun, I'm using some E6000. I'm adding a generous amount of hot glue about 2/3 of the way up on the board, and then following it up with some E6000. When I'm done, I'm then quickly adding 2 lines of hot glue on each side of the board, and then adding on some E6000. The hot glue will set it up quickly, and the E6000 will hold it together permanently. I then attached the 2 ends of the hanger and quickly slid the board inside my basket. I then placed a heavy book on the top for about an hour. I'm adding on an accent bow, and I'm using some of this 2.5 inch wired Bumblebee ribbon. I'm also using a 1 1/2 inch wired ribbon, and I'll link the company below where I purchased mine. And once again, I'm using the 1 1/4 inch honeycomb ribbon from the Dollar Tree. I'm using my bow maker and I picked this up a while back on Amazon. I'm starting with the 2 1/2 inch ribbon. I'm giving myself 2 6-inch tails and 4 4-inch loops. I'm now adding the 1 1/2 inch Bumblebee ribbon. I'm giving myself 2 6-inch tails, but this time I'm giving myself 4 3 1/2 inch loops. To finish up, I'm using the honeycomb ribbon. I'm giving myself the 2 6-inch tails, and this time I'm making 4 3-inch loops. To attach the bow together, I'm using a piece of floral wire. I'm wrapping it around the center and twisting it tightly in the back. I fluffed out the loops and now I'm dovetailing the ends, which is super easy. I just fold my ribbon in half and cut away the end at an angle. When I was done, I then clipped off the excess wire in the back. With the bow complete, I then attached it to my basket using my hot glue gun. I'm adding on a little bumblebee accent, and I had picked these felt bumblebees up on Amazon. I added some hot glue to the center of my bow and then just placed down the bee. To fill in my basket, I'm using an assortment of yellow and white flowers from the Dollar Tree. I placed them inside, arranged them, and with that, my bumblebee hanger basket is complete. If you're new to my channel, please consider clicking on that little red subscribe button below and leaving me a thumbs up. To all my returning friends, you know I think you're the best, and I can't wait to chat with everyone down below in the comments. Getting started, I'm using a 3 1/2 inch terracotta pot from the Dollar Tree. They usually come in a 2-pack, but I used the other one on a past project, and I'll link that below in case you'd like to check it out. This will be the bottom of the mushroom, and I'm painting mine with some white acrylic paint. When I'm done, I'm setting it aside to let it dry. For the top of my mushroom, I'm using an 8-inch glass plate, and I picked mine up at the Dollar Tree. It has a simple design, but you can always use a plain glass plate or even a plastic one that's already a color. I painted mine on both sides with some yellow spray paint, but any color will work. I'm adding some dots to accent the top of the mushroom, and I'm using these small wooden circles. I found this pack in the kids department at Michael's. They give you 3 different sizes, and I'm using the smallest in the package. I gave 15 of them a coat of brown acrylic paint. To attach them, I used my glue gun and I worked my way around the plate. I wasn't sure at first how good the hot glue would hold them onto the plate, but once I attached them, they never moved out of place. With the paint dry on my flower pot, I'm adding the 2 pieces together. I added a generous amount of hot glue around the top edge, and then I centered the plate in the middle. Giving the hot glue about a minute to set up, it holds the mushroom tightly together. I'm adding a flower to the top of the mushroom, and you can use pretty much any type you'd like. I'm using a white lily, and I found these at the Dollar Tree. I added some hot glue to the top center of the mushroom and then attached the lily on its side. I found this cute porcelain frog at the Dollar Tree. He has a flat bottom and he's lying down, and I thought he would be the perfect accent for the top of the mushroom. I added some hot glue to the top of the flower and then attached my frog. Once he's in place, you can leave him as is, but I'm going to add on some extra greenery. I'm adding on some pieces that I had left over from past projects, and I'm adding some in front of the flower and behind the frog. If you can't find the porcelain frog at the Dollar Tree, you can always use their frog pot hugger. Turn it on its side and hide the ladder with some of your greenery. After I added the pieces of greenery to the front, I then turned the mushroom around, and to cover the stem on the flower, I added a few more pieces. To add a bit of an accent on the bottom of the mushroom, I'm adding a few sprigs of greenery there as well. I'm adding on 2 small daisy heads that I had on hand, one next to the frog and one onto the base. To finish up, I'm adding on a butterfly. I purchased 25 of these from Temu for $3. I attached it to the end of the flower, and now that I'm done, I have a cute piece of summer decor. Getting started, I'm using a sign from the Dollar Tree. You can use any sign. I'm going to recycle this fall sign that I had, and it measures 9.5 by 13.5 inches. I'll be working on the back, and I'm removing their original hanger. I'm giving mine a coat of white acrylic paint, but you can choose any color you'd like. This just works best with my decor. I'm making this for myself, so I'm not painting the back, but you can always give that a coat as well. Now that the paint has dried, I'm going to be adding on 2 lines to kind of mimic some planks. I turned my sign to the side, and using my ruler, I measured out 2 lines at about 3 1/16 inch, or pretty much close to that. I wasn't super fussy. I then used my ruler to follow the markings, and with my pencil, I drew a straight line. I then did the same for the second. I'm now using my pencil, and I'm lightly sketching along one of the lines. I'm not being really neat about it, and when I'm done, I'm then rubbing it in with my fingers. If you prefer to have a freshly painted background, just omit this step. I kept adding on my pencil mark until I had done this to both of the lines. Now that the 2 lines on the inside are complete, I'm taking the edge of my pencil and I'm rubbing it around the 4 sides of my sign. Now that I'm done, I'm going to be adding a hanger to the back of my sign, and I'm using some of the nautical rope from the Dollar Tree. I decided how long I wanted it to be, and then I just cut it to size. I'm using my glue gun to attach it, but I'm also using some E6000. And to make sure that the hanger doesn't move out of place, I'm also using 2 pieces of painter's tape. I'm adding a line of hot glue onto each side and then following it up with some E6000. The hot glue will help hold it in place while the E6000 sets up permanently. I'm adding the word beach to my sign, and I'm using this cutout from the Dollar Tree. It's really nice quality and it will actually stand up on its own, and I'm giving mine an ombre effect. These are the colors I chose to use, and I'm going to start with the darker blue and end with the white. I'm starting with the darker blue, and I'm making an effort not to get it on the sides and try to keep it basically on the top. After I have the bee almost painted, I'm then going to add on a little white and then blend the two together. Because the paint is wet, it makes it easy to work with. So after I blend it onto the bee, I'm then pulling the color onto the E. I'm now adding on my darkest green color, and once again I'm going to add some white to help blend it onto the next letter. I'm now adding on my darkest aqua, and once again I'm just blending it all together and adding some white in to help pull it onto the sea. I'm now using my lightest aqua and I'm blending it from the C onto the H. To finish up, I'm adding in some white and I'm pulling it onto the end of the H. And so by doing this, it's not a bright white, it does have a hint of color in it. To join the beach sign, I'm adding a pair of children's flip-flops. They're size 2-3 and they came from the Dollar Tree. I won't be needing the backs, so I'm snipping both of those off. You can always leave yours as is, but I'm going to be painting mine. I turned mine over, and on the bottom, I just snipped off the little stoppers. I'm painting the tops and sides of both of them, and I'm using the same dark blue acrylic paint that I used on my beach sign. Now that they're dry, I'm going to be adding on an accent, and I'm using some of the nautical rope from the Dollar Tree. I'm adding some hot glue to the side of the flip-flop and gluing the nautical rope around the edge. Be careful when you're doing this because it is really easy to get burned by that hot glue. When I came to the end, I made sure to cut the rope short enough so I could tuck it in next to the first piece. Now that my first one is complete, I'm going to do the same to the second. Now that they're dry, I'm replacing the top pieces and I'm simply slipping them back into place. I'm pulling them down and making them a bit tight, and then I'm just snipping off the extra. Then to secure each in place, I'm simply using my glue gun. With my first one complete, I then followed the same instructions for the second. I'm I'm adding an accent onto the top of each flip-flop, and I'm using 2 of these small starfish pins from the Dollar Tree. They're actually attached to a small clothespin, and I just snapped 2 of them off. I used some of my white acrylic paint, and I gave each of them a coat. I'm adding them to the top of the flip-flop, first using some hot glue to help hold them in place, and then adding on some E6000 that will set them up permanently. While those set up, I'm going to add the word beach to my sign. I turned it over, added on some hot glue and a generous amount of E6000. I then attached it to my white sign, making sure that I had even spacing on both sides. I'm adding on the flip-flops, and once again I'm using my glue gun and some E6000, and I'm making sure that when I place them down, each of them covers the 2 old hanger holes on the bottom of the sign. And now that I'm done, my cute beach sign is ready to display. To make my butterfly welcome sign, I'm starting with one of the wooden hanging circles from the Dollar Tree. It measures just under 12 inches. I removed the hanger, and now I'm giving it a coat of sage green acrylic paint. Now that it's dry, I want to distress the edges, so I'm using a sanding block and lightly working my way around. As the focal point for my sign, I'm using a Dollar Tree butterfly. It measures approximately 6 inches long and 7 inches wide. I removed the hanger and the tags, and I wasn't sure if the color would bleed through my scrapbooking paper, so I gave it a coat of white acrylic paint. I let it dry completely and then painted the edges with my light purple acrylic paint. I'm covering my butterfly with this pretty spring floral scrapbooking paper. I placed the butterfly on top of it and then sketched around it with my pencil. I gave myself plenty of extra room and didn't sketch directly against the butterfly. I cut it out, and now I'm using my Mod Podge to attach it. I first added a generous amount to the top of the butterfly. I placed down my cutout and then used a burnisher to remove any of the air bubbles. I let it dry completely, and now I'm using an X-Acto knife to remove the excess paper. I want to add some extra flowers onto my butterfly, so I cut some out of the same paper. I first added Mod Podge to the back and then randomly placed them. Now that I have the added flowers in place, I'm giving the butterfly a complete coat of Mod Podge on the front and the sides. I'm using some Dollar Tree jute to make the butterfly's body. I'm using about 30 inches or so, and starting by attaching one end on the butterfly's back. I then started wrapping the jute around. I did my best to keep it as straight as possible. When I came to the end, I attached that on the back and then added some hot glue to help hold all the jute together. I'm making the butterfly's antennae using an 18-inch piece of floral wire. I slipped it under the jute and then pulled the 2 wires up to the top, making sure they were even. I turned the butterfly over and added some hot glue on the back to help hold them in place. To give the antennae a little curl, I wrapped each of the wires around a pencil. I want my butterfly to sit flat on the sign, so I need to make up the difference in the thickness of the jute. I found these 2 small beads at the Dollar Tree and they're the perfect size. I added 2 dots of E6000 on the back and attached the beads. I'm adding an accent onto the butterfly and I'm using one of these small wooden stars from the Dollar Tree. I painted it with the same sage green acrylic paint. I added some hot glue onto the center of the jute and placed down the star. I'm attaching the butterfly to the sign, adding E6000 onto the 2 beads and the center jute. I centered it low on the sign and in between the 2 hanger holes. To add on the word welcome, I'm using some wooden letters that I picked up at Walmart. I used my purple acrylic paint and painted the letters in the word welcome. I first found their placement on my sign and then used my E6000 to attach them. While the glue was setting up, I cut 8 of the different size flowers out of the same scrapbooking paper. I first found their placement on my sign. Once in place, I then used my Mod Podge to attach them. In the center of each flower, there is a small dot of color. I'm using the end of a paintbrush and I'm covering those dots with the same purple paint that I painted the word welcome in. I decided to do this because it gives the flowers that extra pop of color. I made sure the paint was dry, and then to seal it all in place, I gave it a coat of Mod Podge. To finish up, I'm adding a hanger onto my sign, and I'm using this pretty purple with white polka dot ribbon. I decided how long I wanted my hanger to be. I slipped both ends through the hanger holes and made double knots on the back. This was so easy and inexpensive to make, and I can't wait to hang it next to my front door. Getting started, I'm using one 3.5-inch terracotta pot from this Dollar Tree 2-pack. I am going to be covering it, but to make sure the color doesn't show through, I'm giving mine a coat of golden brown acrylic paint. Now that my pot has dried, I'm going to be wrapping it with some nautical rope from the Dollar Tree. You'll need 2 packages, and I only used about 1/4 of the second. I added some hot glue onto the pot and attached the end of the rope. I gave the hot glue a few seconds to set up, and then I continued adding on more and wrapping my rope around the pot. As I was attaching the rope around the pot, I did my best to keep it as straight as possible. As I was adding the glue, I made sure to push the rope down tightly onto the piece under it. By doing this, it helped to prevent any gaps between the rope. When I come to the end of the first rope, I then add on the second. I attach the rope onto the top of the pot, making sure to leave that opening in the center. I want to make a small dome on the top, so I start adding the hot glue onto the rope and attaching it to itself. Now that I'm done, my flower pot has turned into a beehive. I'm going to be attaching my bumblebees through the hole in the top of the hive. I'll need something to stop the wires, so I'm using a piece of Sahara foam. It's just a piece that I had left over from a past project, and I attached it on the inside bottom using my hot glue gun. For the bee's entrance, I'm using a small wooden flower. It measures about 3.5 inches completely around, and I picked this up at Walmart. I gave mine a coat of yellow acrylic paint. I'm using the end of a paintbrush, and using some white acrylic paint, I'm making decorative dots on the petals of the flower. I'm now using my black acrylic paint and adding more dots onto the petals. Now that they're dry, I painted a black circle in the center. My circle's not perfect, but not to worry. I cut a piece of nautical rope short enough to wrap around it. I then attached it with hot glue. I added hot glue onto the back and then attached it to the hive. To make my bumblebees, I'm using 2 wooden beads. One is 3/4 inch and the other is 1 inch. I used the same black and yellow acrylic paint as I did on the flower, painting the 3/4 inch bead black and the 1 inch bead yellow. I'm using 3 pieces of 12-inch floral wire, and I'm painting all 3 black. I added a small amount of hot glue onto one end of my black wire and tucked it halfway inside the yellow bead. I let the glue cool for a couple of seconds, bent the wire over, and then wrapped it around my yellow bead. When I was done, I added some hot glue onto the end of my wire and tucked that inside the bead as well. For the bumblebee's wings, I'm using 2 small pink hearts. These came in a Dollar Tree pack. If you can't find these, you can always cut them out of paper. I gave both sides a coat of white acrylic paint. I used my scissors and cut the point off on the end of each wing. I added some hot glue onto the end of my bead and attached the 2 wings next to each other. So that the bumblebee will look like it's flying out of the hive, I added some hot glue in between the 2 wings and placed down another piece of the black floral wire. To make the bumblebee's antennae for the head, I cut a 4-inch piece of the black wire in half. I used my clippers and curled down one end on each of the wires. I added some hot glue onto the end of each wire and then tucked them inside the bead. I let the glue cool and then bent both of the wires backwards. I finished up making my bumblebee, hot gluing the head onto the body. When I was done, I made 2 more bumblebees, one with a standing wire and one without. I'm adding a small sign onto my hive, and I printed out the words "Be Happy" on Canva. I'll place the link below in my description in case you'd like to use it. I cut a rectangle out of a paper bag just a little larger than my sign. I used a glue stick and then attached the 2 pieces together. I'm using my punch and making a hole on the side of the tag. I then pulled a strand off of my nautical rope and tied it on as a hanger. I'm now assembling all of my pieces together. I'm sliding the loop from my hanger over the Bumblebee wire, then sliding it into the hole on the top of the hive. I then added in the next Bumblebee on the wire. To finish up, I attached my last Bumblebee onto the front of the hive. Now that I'm done, this cute Be Happy Bumblebee decor is complete. To make my Daisy dog in a bathtub, I'm starting with a 5-inch white porcelain dog, and I found this at the Dollar Tree. You can leave it as is or you can paint it. My youngest dog is gray, so I decided to give mine a coat of gray acrylic paint. Now that it's dry, I'm using a piece of black and white leftover ribbon to use as a collar. I placed a dot of hot glue on the back of the dog's neck, attached the end of the ribbon, and then cut it to size. I then glued that end over the first. The dog is complete, so I'm setting it aside and finishing the rest of the project. I'm using a plastic bathtub, and I found this in the toy department at the Dollar Tree. I'm adding the word bath to my tub, and if you have a Cricut, you can print one out. If not, you can use stickers. I found these at the Dollar Tree, and I'm using the black and white. These stickers are super sticky, and I attached them to the side. I need to raise the dog up in the tub, so I'm using 6 of the Dollar Tree tumbling tower blocks. I added some hot glue to the center of the tub, placed down 3 of the blocks, added some more hot glue, and placed the other 3 on top of the first. I'm giving the bathtub a shower, and I'm using a piece from this Dollar Tree bathtub. You can find this in the toy department. To remove it, I cut it free from the tub. The blue shower head on the top, it spins, and I actually needed to remove it, so I just used my clippers and it popped right off. In place of the blue shower head, I'm using a daisy that I had on hand. I trimmed off the back and then hot glued it to the end of the shower hose. The shower hose is hollow, and I'm using a thick piece of floral wire, placing it inside to give it flexibility. Before I attach it in the tub, I'm first placing down the dog to get an accurate height measurement. I clipped off the extra wire and added on some hot glue to help hold it in place, and then attached it in the tub. I'm attaching the dog to the tub by first adding some hot glue on the blocks and then placing the dog down. To add some suds to the tub, I'm using a handful of everyday cotton balls. It was simple enough, I just pulled them apart. I tucked them around the dog, filled out the tub, making sure that I had enough. Then, to make sure they don't move, I hot glued them into place. For the bubbles in the tub, I'm using 2 packages of Dollar Tree pearls. I have two different sizes, but either of them will work. Starting with the larger pearls, I added some hot glue onto the cotton and randomly placed them down. I then added on more hot glue and randomly placed down the smaller pearls. I found a yellow wooden duck in my stash, so I'm adding that into the bath. To make the riser, I'm starting with a Dollar Tree chalkboard. There are two pieces of wood on the back. I just removed the arm. Using the same gray paint that I painted the dog, I painted the chalkboard frame. To make the feet for my riser, I'm using 8 of the tumbling tower blocks. I'm attaching them together using my Starbond thick glue. It sets unpainted wood up super quick, and if you'd like to give it a try, I do have the company linked below. I added some onto one block and placed the other on the top. When I was done, I had the 4 feet for my riser. They were dry in a couple of minutes, and I gave all 4 a coat of white acrylic paint. You can always leave them as is, but I'm going to wrap mine with some of the Dollar Tree buffalo check ribbon. I measured the ribbon around the block, cut it to size, and then hot glued it on. After my first one was complete, I then wrapped the other 3. I now have all 4 complete, and I'm adding them onto the bottom of the chalkboard to make my riser. You can add 2 on the front and 2 on the back. I opted to add both of mine on each side. With the riser complete, I'm now adding the tub and the riser together. I want to add 2 small white towels to my riser, and I'm using a bar cloth from the Dollar Tree. I opened it up and folded the end over about 2 inches. I then cut 2 pieces out of it to measure about 2 by 3. I opened the 2 up, added on some hot glue, and then folded both towels in half. And now to finish up, I'm gluing the 2 towels together. With that complete, I'm adding some hot glue onto the riser and attaching down the towels. To finish up, I'm adding on an accent of a little daisy. And with that, my cute daisy dog in a bathtub is complete. For this project, I'm actually using an egg cup. Mine's porcelain and I picked it up at a flea market for 50 cents. You can find these just about anywhere and the plastic ones will work great too. I'm adding on some simple closed eyes and I'm using a black permanent marker, but if you're more comfortable working with paint or a paint pen, those will work just as well. I drew on 2 half circles and I tried to keep the length and the size as even as possible. I then used my marker and added 3 eyelashes to the top of each eye. I'm giving my planter a bow accent and I'm using some of this black and white farmhouse ribbon from the Dollar Tree. I made a simple bow and when I was done, I cut both ends off at an angle. To add on the bow, it's as easy as placing a dot of hot glue onto the front of the planter and attaching it in place. I'm adding in one of the Dollar Tree succulent picks, and this one kind of looked like hair to me, so I thought this one would be perfect. I checked the size and then cut the stem off to fit. I placed a generous amount of hot glue into the bottom of my planter, then added the stem and held it in place until it set up. Now that it's set up, I'm going to be filling in the open space and I'm using some of this reindeer moss that I picked up at the Dollar Tree. I tucked enough in to hide the stem on the succulent, and this had to be one of the least expensive and cutest planters that I made. You can place it just about anywhere and it works great on a tiered tray too. To start my cottage tray, I'm using one of the oval-shaped metal planters with the flowers and gardens on both sides. It's from the Dollar Tree and it measures 10.5 inches in length. I'm using a piece of sandpaper and on both sides I'm sanding off the black paint from the raised lettering. I'll be painting it white and this just helps out the spray paint. I'm adding some rope accents onto my cottage tray and I'm using some of the white, thick nautical rope from the Dollar Tree. I'm using some E6000 and I'm adding a heavy bead around the bottom of the planter. I then placed down one end of the rope and pressed it into the E6000 as I worked my way around. When I came to the end, I trimmed off the extra rope and attached it. I'm now turning my planter over and following the exact same instructions for the bottom. I made sure as I was attaching the rope, I pushed it into the E6000. For the top of my cottage tray, I'm using a rectangle plastic charger from the Dollar Tree, and it measures 14 inches by 6.5. And one thing that I noticed on the bottom, it does state that you cannot use it for food. I'm attaching it onto the base using my E6000. I added it on the metal edge as well as the rope, and then centered the tray on the top. After letting it set up for a couple of hours, I'm using my white spray paint and I ended up giving it 3 coats. To hide the raised lettering, I'm using some of the Dollar Tree burlap ribbon. I wrapped it around the base and then cut it to size. I wrapped the ribbon around the front, hot glued one side on the back and then the other. I'm using a piece of sandpaper to distress the edges of the tray. It's a subtle effect that leaves a small dark edge that defines the tray. I want to hide where I attach the two ribbon ends together, and I'm using about a 10-inch piece of the same burlap ribbon. I folded it in half and made a knot in the middle. I then used my glue gun to attach it. To decorate the front of my cottage tray, I'm using 3 wooden knobs. I found these in a bag of assorted wooden pieces, and you can pretty much use anything to decorate the front. I'm painting the 2 that are the same with my black acrylic paint and the blue one with the white. Now that they're dry, I'm using a piece of sandpaper to distress them. Now that I have all 3 distressed, I'm going to add them onto the front of my tray. I added some E6000 to the bottom of each and placed them down on the ribbon. Now that they've dried, I love the neutral tones, and I can use my cottage tray throughout the seasons and holidays. Getting started, I'm using one of the round wooden welcome signs from the Dollar Tree. I removed the hanger to make it easier to paint, and now I'm giving the background a coat of yellow acrylic paint. Now that it's dry, I'm using some black acrylic paint and painting the word welcome. With the word welcome dry, I'm now giving my sign a coat of satin Mod Podge. This step is completely optional. I just wanted to give my sign a little bit of a shine. With my sign dry, I'm replacing the hanger, and I'm using a piece of polished hemp, but you can use anything that you have on hand. I cut a length of the hemp and then just added it to my sign. I'm adding on a bow, and I'm using 2 1.5-inch wired Bumblebee ribbons. I'll have the site where I purchased them linked below in my description. Using my bow maker, I'm starting with the burlap ribbon. I'm giving myself 2 5-inch tails and 4 4-inch loops. For my second ribbon, I'm once again giving myself 2 5-inch tails, but this time I'm giving myself 4 3.5-inch loops. I'm attaching my bow together using a piece of floral wire. I place it over the top and twist it tightly on the back. With it tightly together, I fluffed out the loops. I'm dovetailing the 4 ends, which is super easy. I just fold the ribbon in half and cut away at an angle. Before I add it to my sign, I'm snipping off the extra wire on the back. I added some hot glue to the top of the sign and placed down the bow. I'm adding on 2 daisies with greenery, and I'm cutting 2 from this bunch. I added some hot glue under each end of the bows and attached down the daisies. I'm using just the daisy head and attaching that to the center of my bow. For the final accent, I'm using one of these little felt bumblebees that I found on Amazon. I added some hot glue to the center flower and attached down the little bee. And with that in place, my bumblebee welcome sign is ready to hang. To make my woodland gnome planter, I'm recycling a terracotta pot that I had on hand, and mine measures 6 inches. Although most of it will be covered, I'm giving mine a coat of this pretty sage green acrylic paint. For my gnome's beard, and I always like to try different things, I'm using some of these summer sunflowers from the Dollar Tree. I'll be using all 5, so I'm removing the heads from the stems. And now I'm pulling the flowers apart to use the petals. Now that I'm done, I have 10 separate large petals and 3 separate small. There is a front side and a back side to the petals, so I'm making sure that when I fold them, the front side is showing. Adding them to the pot, I'm folding the front side of the petals over the back, adding some hot glue, adding the folded flowers, and making sure that they hang a bit over the bottom of the pot. I decided how wide I wanted my beard to be, folded over my next flower, added some hot glue, and attached it to the pot. From there, I continued folding my flowers in half, adding on the hot glue, and overlapping the flower row before it. This was the color of flowers that I chose, only because it was neutral, but you can always change it up to make it your own. I made some similar gnomes using flower petals for the beards, and I'll have that video linked below in case you'd like to check it out. I continued working my way up the pot until I had used all 10 of the flower petals. Along with the larger petals, there are 3 small, so I'm folding those in half and adding them to the top. With the petals all in place, I'm going to add on the gnome's nose, and I'm using one of these small wooden knobs. Mine actually has a flat backing, but you can always use the ones that are completely round. You can leave the wood a natural color, but I decided to give mine a coat of coral acrylic paint. I placed one of the wooden skewers from the Dollar Tree into the hole, and it just made it easier to paint. With the nose dry, I'm using my glue gun to attach it to the gnome about 2 inches down from the top. I'm using some of the Dollar Tree nautical rope to add a braid accent around the top of my planter. I cut 3 pieces in 20-inch lengths. I'm gathering the 3 ends together and using a clear piece of tape to attach them. With them all attached together, I'm placing my taped end at the top. To hold my rope in place while I'm braiding, I'm using a heavy candy jar and I'm just placing it on the end. The weight of the candy jar does a good job, so I can braid my 3 pieces of rope together. At the end of my braid, I'm once again using a piece of clear tape to attach the ends together. I'm now attaching it to the top of my GNOME planter by using my hot glue gun. Now that it's completely attached, I'm cutting off the taped ends and attaching those to the back of the planter. To add on another accent and cover the area between the gnome's nose and the braid, I'm using some of the Dollar Tree's decorative moss. It's a little messy while you're doing it, but I'm adding some hot glue to my planter and then just attaching the moss. You can add as much or as little of the moss as you'd like. It's just personal preference. I also did use my finger protector and that helped me from getting burned by the hot glue. When I was done, and to help hold the moss in place, I gave it a heavy coat of hairspray. Now that I'm done, I'm going to be adding on some simple hands, and I'm using some of the burlap ribbon from the Dollar Tree. I measured and cut the ribbon from one side of the planter to the other. Once again, using my glue gun, I placed a line of hot glue in the center of the ribbon and then folded it down. I'm now adding a line of hot glue on the folded ribbon and attaching the other side. Once again, I'm using my finger protector because the burlap ribbon is porous and some of the glue is sneaking through. It's super easy to make the gnome's hands. All I'm doing is making a simple knot in the middle of the burlap. To attach them, I'm making sure the hands are centered under the gnome's nose, and then using my glue gun, I'm attaching each arm to the sides of the planter. To finish up, I added in some greenery, and with that, my Woodland gnome planter is ready to display. To make my home sign, I'm starting with the wooden letters HOME. They measure 5 inches from top to bottom, and I picked mine up at Walmart. I want my letters to have a white base, so I used some white acrylic paint and gave the top and the sides a coat. I found this pretty tissue paper at the Dollar Tree, and I love the greenery print, so I'm going to use this to cover my letters. I placed my letters down on the tissue paper, making sure there would be plenty of greenery when I attached the 2 pieces together. I then used my scissors and cut around the letters on the tissue paper. I trimmed it up close to make it easier to work with. I'm using my matte Mod Podge to attach the tissue paper to the letters. I'll also be using a piece of plastic wrap and a damp paper towel. To attach the tissue paper, I first added an even but generous amount of Mod Podge on the very top of the letter. I then gently placed down the tissue paper. Once I had it in place, I used my fingers to press it onto the letter. When I was done, I placed a piece of clear wrap over it, and as I worked my way around, I pressed out any of the wrinkles. By using the clear wrap, it will prevent me from tearing the tissue paper. I removed the clear wrap, and now I'm using a damp paper towel, and I'm basically dabbing it over the letter. This also helps cleaning up the wrinkles and removes any of that Mod Podge residue. I followed the same instructions for all of my letters and made sure they were completely dry. To remove the excess tissue paper, I'm using a piece of heavy grit sandpaper and rubbing it on the edge of the letter. The sandpaper did a great job clearing off the excess tissue paper, but when it came to the M, I wasn't able to get into the point, so I used an everyday emery board file, and that did the trick. I have all my letters sanded, and now I'm making a backing to hang them. Someone had thrown a bunch of new wood in the trash, so I stopped and picked it up, and I'm recycling it for this sign. I'm using 2 of the pieces. They each measure about 1/8 of an inch thick. They're each 3 inches in height and 24 inches in length. I'm attaching them together using 2 extra large craft sticks and a small craft stick. I added some E6000 onto the bottom of the 2 larger craft sticks and attached them in the center, one on each end. There's a little space in between the 2 larger craft sticks, and I added some E6000 on that as well. I added E6000 to the smaller craft stick and placed it vertically in the center. If you don't have any wood on hand, you can always use one of the longer Dollar Tree signs and work on the back. I let it set up overnight, and now I'm giving it a coat of golden brown acrylic paint. Now that it's completely dry, and this is personal preference, I'm using a piece of the heavy grit sandpaper, and I'm sanding around the edges and some of the flat area. Finishing up, it gives it a bit of a rustic vibe. It's now time to add on the word home, and I first like to find the letter's placement. I'm leaving a small space at the end to add on a vase, and I'm using this small plastic bottle from the Dollar Tree. I checked the spacing, and now using my E6000, I attach down the letters. While those set up, I'm taking the plastic bottle and using some thin white rope that I had on hand. I added a dot of hot glue to the bottom edge of the bottle and attached one end of the rope. I let it set up for a quick second and then started wrapping the rope around, and every so often I'd add a little hot glue to help hold it in place. As I was wrapping it, I wasn't super fussy because most of it will be hidden. When I had it wrapped, I then snipped off the extra rope. I'm adding it to my home sign by first adding a generous amount of E6000 onto the bottle. Then, to be sure it doesn't move out of place as it's setting up, I'm using a piece of painter's tape. It's the next day. I remove the painter's tape and the vase is securely attached to the sign. I'm using some of the Dollar Tree green sheer ribbon and making a simple bow for the top of my vase. I added a dot of hot glue onto the rope and attached the bow. You can add in any type of flowers to your vase. I'm using some Dollar Tree daisies. I popped off one of the flower heads and a piece of the greenery. I then made sure to snip off the finished edge. I added some hot glue to the front of the vase, attached the greenery, and then the daisy. Before I add the flowers in, I'm using a piece of jute that I had on hand. It measures about 36 inches, and I painted it the same color as the sign. I turned my sign over, added on a line of hot glue, and attached one end of the hanger. I cut 2 pieces out of the green sheer ribbon, and I'm adding one over the top of both ends of my hanger. It just gives it a little bit extra support. I then followed the same instructions for the other side. To finish up, I added a small bunch of daisies into the vase. Now that I'm done, this pretty home sign is ready to hang. I'm making my Hello Summer planter by recycling an Easter basket that I found in the trash. I used my clippers and I removed both of the handles. I want my planter to be bright and cheery, so I'm giving it a complete coat of yellow spray paint. I'm adding on a ribbon and a bow accent using this cute bumblebee and burlap ribbon, and you can find this online. Using my hot glue gun, I attached it around my planter. I'm recycling this inexpensive Easter basket, so it probably will only last one season, but if you use a high quality basket, you'll probably get many more seasons out of it. I'm adding the words Hello Summer to my planter, and I'm using some of these wood tiles that I picked up at Hobby Lobby, but I know that at one time they did sell them at the Dollar Tree. To make my words easier to attach to the planter, I'm using 2 of the craft sticks or popsicle sticks from the Dollar Tree. I checked the length for each word and snipped a bit off for hello. I added a line of hot glue to both sticks and then attached my letters. Now that I have the words Hello Summer complete, I'm attaching them to the front of my planter. I added some hot glue onto the ribbon and then centered one over the other. Then, using the same bumblebee ribbon, I made a small, simple bow for the front. I then used my glue gun to attach it to the top of my planter. To hold my plants, I'm adding in a black metal mesh basket from the Dollar Tree, and I cut one of their cocoa plant liners to fit. I added the 2 together and placed in some plants that I picked up at my local garden center. And with that, my recycled Hello Summer planter is complete. To make these pretty white flowers, I'm starting with a Dollar Tree Microfiber long duster, and this will be the base for the flowers. I'll be attaching them together using the white Teddy Just yarn, and this came from the Dollar Tree as well. It has a little texture to it, and it blends in nicely with the microfiber. Using my scissors, I'm cutting about a 12-inch piece. It makes it easier to have your yarn cut first, and now I'm grabbing about a handful of the microfiber. I then used my scissors and I cut it off as close to the base as possible. I then pushed all the microfiber pieces together in a bunch. I centered it on the piece of yarn and then tied it tightly together in a knot. When I was done, I turned it over and pushed all the fibers to the top, and then trim them off neatly with my scissors. When I was done, I then made 2 more, and depending on how much microfiber you use will determine the size of your flowers. You won't need the yarn tails, and I snipped mine off. To make the stems for my flowers, I'm starting off with an everyday brown lunch bag, and you can find these at the Dollar Tree. I made the bag completely flat and then cut it into 3 even sections. When I was done, I opened one of the end sections up and then cut it down the center. I then cut the excess on the ends off. I marked the top of the bag at 2 inches, and then I ran a pencil line from that mark to the end. I followed the pencil line and cut it into a 2-inch strip. I then made 2 more. I'm making the stems by wrapping the bag strips around 3 pieces of 12-inch heavyweight floral wire. I added a dot of hot glue about halfway up from the bottom edge and attached one end of my wire. I then added a dot in the center and on the end and let the hot glue set up. When you're done, you will have a piece of the floral wire hanging over the end. I folded the bottom edge over my wire and then started twisting it from one end. When I had it tightly twisted on one end, I then added a bit of hot glue to help hold the paper in place. I continued working my way, twisting the paper as tightly as possible, and when I came to the other end, I added a dot of hot glue to help hold it in place. When I was done, I then made 2 more, so I had a total of 3 stems. I painted all 3 with sage green acrylic paint. Another option for the stems is to paint 3 of the Dollar Tree wooden skewers and paint them with green paint. I'm giving my flowers some leaves, and I'm using some that were left over from a floral stem. I pulled the plastic bottoms off of each and then painted both sides with the same green acrylic paint. If you don't have any leaves on hand, you can always cut some out of a paper bag, and those will work just as well. With everything painted and dry, it's now time to put my flowers together. I'm snipping off the extra wire on the stem, and I'm leaving just about a ½ inch. I then slipped the hole in the leaf over the wire and added some hot glue on to hold it in place. I took the flower head, added some hot glue to the bottom where I attached it together, and then slipped the stem inside. It's so easy to change their color. All you need to do is grab your favorite acrylic paint and a paintbrush. Keep dabbing it on until you feel your flower has enough color, then set it aside to dry. I trim the ends off of my stems and then place them into a bud vase. And with that, these easy and inexpensive flowers will make a pretty addition to just about any room. To make my daisy sign for a tiered tray, I'm using 5 of the small wooden dice from the Dollar Tree. I'm painting all 5 of my dice with my white acrylic paint. Now that my dice are dry, I'm adding the word daisy to them. You can always print that out on your Cricut, but I'm going to use some stickers from the Dollar Tree. I'm using the black and white stickers, and for some strange reason, they only gave me one floral eye, so I'm going to cut the L and turn that into an eye. And now I'm spelling out the word daisy with my 5 letters. I'm attaching the dice together using my E6000. The glue has dried, and now I'm going to add some little feet on the bottom. This step is completely optional. You can always leave them as is. I'm using 4 of the small wooden blocks from the Dollar Tree, and if you don't have any of these, you can always cut a tumbling tower block in half. I painted mine with black acrylic paint, and now that the paint has dried, I'm going to add them to the bottom of my sign. I turned my sign over and I glued 2 on each end. With the glue dry, I'm wrapping the feet with this pretty black and white polka dot ribbon that I picked up at Michael's. I cut 2 strips that would fit, and then I hot glued them around the feet. As an accent on my sign, I'm using this large wooden pot from this Dollar Tree 3-pack. I painted mine with some yellow acrylic paint. As an accent, I'm using my same black and white polka dot ribbon. I cut it to size and then used my glue gun to attach it. I'm adding some small daisies to my daisy sign, and I picked mine up on Temu. They cost me $2.51. I snipped a few off, enough to fill out the pot. I added some hot glue inside the flower pot and then arranged the daisies. I used my glue gun and I attached the flower pot on the top of the Y. To finish up, I cut 3 more daisies and I added those on top of the D. And now that I'm done, my daisy tiered tray sign is ready to display. I'm starting my planter by using 3 of the wooden crates from the Dollar Tree. I'm attaching all 3 together and I'm using my Starbond thick glue. I love this glue because it sets up super quick and it works really well on a natural wood surface. If you'd like to give it a try, I do have the company linked below in my description. Using my glue, I'm attaching 2 of the crates together. I added 1 crate with glue behind the other. When they were attached, I then added some more of my Starbond thick glue and attached the top crate. By adding that crate in the back on its side, it makes a nice shelf for your top tier. I'm adding 2 handles on my top and my front crate, and I'm using 4 of the tumbling tower blocks from the Dollar Tree. I found their placement on the side of the crates, and now using my Starbond thick glue, I'm attaching them in place. I gave it a minute or so to set up, and then I turned it over and did the exact same thing on the other side. Adding on these handles is completely optional. You can always leave the crates as is. I'm raising my planter and I'm using 8 of the tumbling tower blocks. I'm once again using my Starbond thick glue, attaching 2 blocks together so I have a set of 4. It only takes a couple of minutes for them to set up, and now I'm adding them onto the bottom crates. To attach them, I first added some glue to the top of the 4 stacks. Then placed one under the 4 corners of the crates. I moved them around a bit until they were each on the outside edge. Now that my planter has its handles and its legs, I'm using some white acrylic paint and I'm giving it a complete coat. I chose to paint mine a neutral color, but honestly, I think you could paint it just about any color or even stain it, and that would work great for this project. With the paint dry, I'm going to be adding on a ribbon accent, and this step is completely optional. You can either paint on a stripe or just leave it as is. I'm going to be using some of this black and white farmhouse ribbon, and I picked this up at the Dollar Tree. I measured from handle to handle across the front, and I cut 2 pieces. I'm attaching the 2 ribbons on the front, and to make sure they have a nice flat finish on the crate, I'm using my Mod Podge. I added some to the middle board and then smoothed on the ribbon. I let the ribbons dry completely, and now to soften up the white and give it a bit of a rustic vibe, I'm going to use my pencil. I'm rubbing the edge of the pencil along the edges of the crates, and then I'm rubbing it in with my finger. As I'm working my way around, I'm not being neat or fussy. I'm just kind of adding the pencil markings, rubbing it in, and when I'm done, it gives it a nice smoky edge. As with all the things that I do in my project, this is once again optional. I always like to add this accent. It just kind of gives it a bit of a rustic appearance, but if you prefer yours to be a bright white and clean, once again, just omit this step. I'm adding 2 bows to the front of my planter, and I'm using that same farmhouse ribbon. I made 2 simple bows and I cut the tails off at an angle. Using my glue gun, I attach the two on opposite corners. I'm adding 4 different Dollar Tree succulents into my planter. 2 are in pots and 2 were picks, and I shortened their stems. Along with the succulents, I'm adding some sprigs of greenery from the Dollar Tree, along with some boxwood that I had on hand. I'm placing them in the crates, but I'm not permanently attaching them because later on I want to have the option to change them out. With the succulents in place, I then added in those sprigs of greenery. Now that I'm done, this cute rustic planter is complete. To make my LED candle holders, I'm using a pair of women's size 7/8 flip-flops from the Dollar Tree. I'm accenting the outside edges of the flip-flop using some of this nautical rope from the Dollar Tree. I place some glue on the outside edges of the flip-flop and then just attach the nautical rope. While you're adding it, just be watchful where the hot glue is because it is easy to get burned. Once I made my way around, I cut the rope flush and attached it next to my first piece. With my first one done, I then followed the same instructions for the second. To add my hanger, I poked 2 holes with my scissors in the bottom of each flip-flop. For the hanger, I'm using the leftover piece of nautical rope. I taped off both ends, it just makes them easier to slide through the holes, and then I pulled one end through each hole and I knotted them on the back. I made sure the knot was tight and then I pulled it against the flip-flop. I then did the same for my second flip-flop. There's a little bit of extra rope poking out through each knot, so I'm just trimming that off. To make sure that the knots don't pull out or slide on the back, I'm using some E6000 and I'm just adding some around each one. I'm attaching the 2 flip-flops together and I'm hanging one a little bit higher than the other. So I'm just finding that placement and then I'm hot gluing them together. I added some hot glue to the inside rope and then I just held them together until they set up. I want to make sure that they both hang straight, so I just added a line of hot glue on the heel and attached the rope. I'm adding in 2 candle cups, and the only tricky part about this is making sure that they will fit inside your flip-flop. At one time, these held yogurt, and if you can't find a candle cup, you can always just use an LED candle. I'm once again using some of that nautical rope from the Dollar Tree, and I'm just hot gluing it around the top of each of my candle holders. Using an LED candle is the only type to use for this project, and you don't have to use glass as your candle cup. You can always use plastic or tin or anything that you'd like to recycle. I'm adding my first cup into the flip-flop and I'm using the side supports to help hold it in place. I'm once again using my E6000 and I'm adding a generous amount to each side and then pulling it up over the cup. Now that I have it in place to help hold it while it sets up, I'm using a piece of painter's tape. I'm now placing in my second cup, once again adding the E6000 and the painter's tape to help hold it in place. Once I had them all in place, I did let them set up overnight. My flip-flops have a coastal theme with starfish, and I found these starfish pins at the Dollar Tree. They're attached to a small clothespin, and I just snapped them off. The light blue color wasn't what I was looking for, so I gave each of them a coat of this pretty coastal blue paint. I removed the painter's tape from my candle holders, and now I'm adding on the two starfish. I added a dot of hot glue onto the nautical rope on each holder. To finish up, I'm using 2 of these LED candles, and I had picked these up at the Dollar Tree. I simply turned them on and placed them in my candle holders. I love the way these came out. They definitely scream summer, and I'm going to make a few more sets and hang them out around my deck. To start my Bumblebee garden, I'm using 3 3-inch wooden flowers. They came in a 20-pack from Temu, and I paid $3.07. You can find them at Michael's and sometimes Dollar Tree, and for this project, be sure not to buy the ones with pre-drilled holes. I'm painting 1 with yellow acrylic paint and 2 with white. Now that my flowers are dry, I'm giving each one a center. You can always paint yours on, but I'm going to use some wooden circles that I found in the kids department at Michael's. They come in small, medium, and large, and I'm using the medium size. I painted 1 with the matching yellow, 1 white, and 1 with my black acrylic paint. These are the color combinations that I chose for my flowers, and then I hot glued each into the center. Using the same 3 colors of paint, I'm adding some accent dots onto the flowers. I dipped the end of my paintbrush into the paint and added some random dots on the flowers. I added yellow on one and black on another white flower, and on the yellow flower I added black accents. Now that all the paint has dried, I'm going to add on some stems. I'm using some of the Dollar Tree wooden skewers. I have some shorter pieces already cut and left over from past projects, so I'm using 3 of those, and they measure about 8 inches each in length. I painted all 3 of them with my green acrylic paint. To attach them, I turned each flower over and added some hot glue to the back. The flowers are complete, and I'm going to set them aside and let the glue cool. For the back of my Bumblebee garden, I'm using a Dollar Tree 7 by 9.5 inch wooden hanging board. It has a bead hanger, I'm removing that and hanging onto the beads. I'm sure I'll use those in a future project. You can always paint the edges. I'm giving mine an accent using some of this farmhouse ribbon from Michaels. I added hot glue to the corners and attached my ribbon. With that in place, I turned the board over and attached the ends on the back. I'm adding a flower pot to the front of my sign, and I'm using some wood slices from the Dollar Tree. They measure 3 inches in length, and I'm using 8 of them. 3 of them I'm using as is. The other 5 I cut a bit off of each to taper the pot. I then painted all 8 with my white acrylic paint. I used my glue gun to attach them, centering the shortest one first. I'm attaching on the flowers and I'm centering the yellow flower first. I'm then placing the 2 whites down at an angle, and if you notice that your stems are too long, just snip off the extra. I attach them to the sign, adding some hot glue under each. To hide where the stems and the top of the pot meet, I'm using a 6-inch wooden craft stick from the Dollar Tree. I painted it with the same yellow acrylic paint that I used on the flower. I attached it by adding some hot glue to the top of the pot. I'm adding a hanger to my sign. I cut 18 inches of the same matching ribbon that I used around the outside. I turned my sign over and attached the 2 ends on the back. I'm adding a simple bow to the front of my sign, and I'm using some of the farmhouse ribbon from the Dollar Tree. I made a simple bow and then cut both tail ends off at an angle. I added some hot glue and centered it on the top of my pot. To finish up, I'm adding on 3 felt Bumblebee accents. You can find these at Walmart, on Amazon. Mine came from Temu, and I paid $2.97 for 15. Using my glue gun, I added all 3 to the front. With those in place, this cute Bumblebee garden sign is ready to hang. I'm making a cute bumblebee vase, or you can use it as an LED candle holder. I'm starting with a glass jar from the Dollar Tree that is 6 inches tall, and mine came with a lid, but I won't need it, so I'm removing it. I'm covering my jar, and I'm using different yellow and white flowers that were left over from past projects. The bigger flowers I cut first into strips and then cut them into smaller pieces. Because I'll be attaching the flowers to the jar all at the same time, I made sure that I cut plenty to cover it. I made sure my jar was washed clean, and I'm using a paper plate to catch the pieces of the flowers. I'll be attaching them using Mod Podge and my paintbrush. I added a thick coat of Mod Podge onto my jar. I'll be wrapping the top part with nautical rope, so I left that part open. I then spread the cut pieces of flowers onto the Mod Podge, doing my best to completely cover it. When I was done, I made sure the Mod Podge was completely dry, letting it set up for about 4 hours or so. And then I moved my hand around it, pressing in the flowers. Now, to be sure nothing moves out of place, I'm using a foam brush and I'm dabbing a coat of Mod Podge around my jar. When I'm done, I then let it dry completely. Now that it's dry, I'm using some of the Dollar Tree nautical rope to accent around the top. I first placed down some hot glue on the top of the jar and attached one end of the rope. From there, I continued adding on hot glue and wrapping the rope around the top. If you prefer not to add on the rope accent, you can always Mod Podge the flowers to the top of the jar. Now that I have it completely wrapped, I snipped off the rope and attached the end. I'm adding on a ribbon accent, and I'm using a 7/8 inch buffalo check ribbon, and mine came from Michaels. I wrapped it around to get my measurement and then hot glued it to the jar. To make the hive's entrance, I'm using a flat wooden circle, and it measures 1.5 inches. I painted mine with some black acrylic paint. I cut a piece of nautical rope to fit around my circle, and then I hot glued it on. I added on some hot glue and attached it. I'm making a simple bow using this Dollar Tree ribbon. I'm making mine small enough to be an accent on the side of the hive entrance. I then used my hot glue to attach it. Now that I have it in place, I'm using a small daisy to accent the center of the bow. I added a little hot glue and popped it into place. I'm using this cute Bumblebee pot climber from the Dollar Tree. I want the top hooks to match the color of my nautical rope, so I'm painting them with some golden brown acrylic paint. When they were dry, I then hooked the Bumblebee onto the side of the hive. To finish up, I placed in some silk flowers, but you can always use fresh. This will also work perfect as an LED candle holder, and I decided to add in some fairy lights. This was so easy and inexpensive to make, and I love the idea that it has a dual purpose. To make my flamingo planter, I'm starting with one of the pink plastic flamingos from the Dollar Tree. It comes with 2 metal posts that you can use as legs and 4 different holes to position the bird. This planter is so easy to make. I used a sharp pair of scissors and I cut a hole on the top. You can cut the opening as big or as small as you'd like. I cut mine a little bit more towards the back. When I was done, the edges weren't too sharp, but I did want to smooth them out, so I just used a piece of sandpaper and gave them a little rub. I went outside and I picked up a handful of small rocks. You can also find some at the Dollar Tree. I'm using these as weight and also as drainage. I then just placed them inside the flamingo. To finish up, it's as easy as adding in some live plants, and I'm just using some that I picked up at my local garden center. To make the flamingo look like it's facing downward, you just add one of the metal rods into the back and one into the neck. I'm having mine stand up straight, so I just slipped the 2 in the center holes. With that complete, I then added mine as an accent to an outside flower pot. To make my cone planter, I'm using one of these safety cones, and I picked this up in the toy department at the Dollar Tree. Using my green spray paint, I'm giving it a coat. Now that it's dry, I'm adding on the hangers. I'm using some polished hemp that I had on hand, and I cut 2 pieces at 30 inches each. I slipped one end of the hemp through the hole and tied it into a knot. I then tied the other end through the opposite hole and tied that into a knot as well. I then followed the same instructions for the other side. I used hemp for my project, but you can always use rope or even a heavy cord. I used my scissors to clean up the end of the knots, and I made sure not to cut them too closely. I'm adding a key ring to the end of my 2 hangers, and I just slipped both of the ropes through the ring. For the accent on the front, I'm taking 2 lengths of the hemp and I'm tying it into a simple bow. To add the bow to my planter, I'm first using some E6000, placing it on the back of the bow, and then following up with some hot glue. The hot glue will hold the E6000 in place while it sets up. To accent the bow, I'm using one of these cute felt bumblebees from Amazon. I added a dot of hot glue to the center of my bow and just popped it into place. I'm filling my planter with an assortment of white and yellow flowers from the Dollar Tree, and I placed them randomly in my planter. I'm adding in 2 butterfly accents, and I found these on Temu. They each come on a long piece of wire, and I just added them into my arrangement. And with that, my hanging cone planter is complete. I'm starting this planter by using one of the oversized dice from the Dollar Tree. Each side has a paper circle, except for one side of mine was missing. Some of them were falling off, so I just pulled off the loose paper. To make the dice all one color, I'm using my white acrylic paint and I'm giving it a complete coat. Now that the paint has dried, I'm going to be wrapping it with some of the white nautical rope, and I picked this up at the Dollar Tree. I'm starting with the finished edge on the rope, adding some hot glue to the dice and attaching it. From there, all I'm doing is continuing to add hot glue onto the dice, and I'm wrapping the rope around it. As I'm working around the dice and I'm adding the rope, I'm making sure to keep it as straight as possible. I keep on adding that hot glue and attaching the rope. When I come to the top of the dice, I'm wrapping the rope around so that it gives me a little bit of an edge, and then I'm clipping off the excess and then just hot gluing that in place. My dice is completely wrapped and I left the top open, and now I'm going to paint the lower half with some timeless gray acrylic paint. I used my paintbrush and I painted the rope just about halfway up on the dice. I'm using gray because I want it to match my stone accents, but you can always just leave it white or paint it any color you'd like. While the paint was drying, I actually went outside and I picked up a handful of assorted pebbles and stones. Because I wanted them to match the paint on my planter, I did try to find most of them in shades of gray. I'm attaching them to the planter where the gray meets the white rope. I'm using my glue gun and some E6000. I'm first adding the line of hot glue and then placing a line of E6000. The hot glue will hold the stones in place while the E6000 sets them up permanently. I continue to add on my rocks, making sure to hide that seam where the gray and the white rope met. If you can't find any rocks where you live, the Dollar Tree does sell some, and they do come in different colors. With the rock accent attached, this is what the planter looks like. For the greenery, I'm adding in 2 succulents from the Dollar Tree. They were both attached to clips, so I just removed them from the bottom. Along with the succulents, I'm adding in some of the boxwood greenery, and this always makes a really nice filler. I used a skewer and I poked some random holes in the top of my planter. I'm first using my glue gun and attaching the 2 succulents. With those in place, I'm now adding my greenery by poking the stems in the holes that I made with the skewer. Now that all the greenery is added, my rock planter is complete. Getting started, I'm using a 12-inch round by 2-inch metal pan. It's definitely seen a lot of action and it's pretty worn, but that's exactly what you want to use. I picked mine up at Savers. I got the senior discount, so it ended up costing me $2.80. I did my best and removed the price tag from the back, and to be sure there isn't any grease or dirt, I washed it with my Dawn dish soap. To make the shelf in the center, I'm starting with an 18 by 2-inch piece of wood from the Dollar Tree. I placed the wood against the pan to get my measurements and marked it with a pencil. It measured about 11.5 inches. I cut the wood to fit and slightly angled the two ends to accommodate the rounded edges. Now that I know it fits, I'm going to give mine a coat of golden brown acrylic paint. Now that the paint is dry, I'm distressing it with a piece of sandpaper. I decided to paint my shelf, but you can always leave it natural or stain it, and I think that would look great too. If you're using a newer pan, I would suggest using some sandpaper and sanding the area where you're attaching the shelf and the hanger. I'm using some painter's tape, and this is completely optional, along with E6000 to attach the shelf into my pan. I added some to the two sides and the back. I think the scratches in the pan help the E6000 adhere to it, and that's why if you're using a new pan, I'd scratch up the area for the shelf and the hanger to help the glue adhere easier. I found the shelf's placement. I pressed it down so it was tightly in place, and then I used some painter's tape to help hold it while it was setting up. The glue's now completely dry, so I'm removing the tape and checking out the shelf. You can make these type of shelves in different sizes and shapes, and I think this is a great way to repurpose an old pan. For the shelf's hanger, I'm using 24 inches of the Dollar Tree nautical rope. In addition to the rope, to help hold it in place, I'm using 2 pieces of the Dollar Tree burlap ribbon. I'm first turning the pan over, and I'm making sure using my fingers that I know where the 2 sides of the shelf are. Before I permanently attach the hanger, I like to find its placement. I'll be using some painter's tape to hold it along with the burlap strips. I added a generous amount of E6000 and placed down both hangers. And now to give my hangers just a bit more strength, I'm adding down some E6000 on the rope in both sides and placing down the burlap strips. To help hold it all together while the glue sets up, I'm adding on some painter's tape. When I was done, I set it aside and let it set up overnight. All that was left to do was remove the tape, and my repurposed farmhouse shelf is ready to hang. To make my planter, I'm using 4 of the 4x4 tile coasters that I found in the kitchen department at the Dollar Tree. I'm going to be attaching them together, and I'm using some E6000. To help me hold up the tile, I'm using one of the wooden box drawers from the Dollar Tree. But you can pretty much use anything to help you hold the tile in place. I'm using masking tape to hold mine together, but painter's tape would work great too. To start attaching them, I'm first placing 2 against the box, and I'm placing one end on one tile inside the other. I'm placing some E6000 on the inside of one tile, and then attaching the 2 together. I'm only using the box as a support, and then I'm attaching the tiles together using some masking tape. With those 2 in place, I'm now adding some E6000 on the inside of the first tile and attaching my third. Then, to hold it in place, I added on some more masking tape. Now that I have my 3 sides attached, I'm just sliding out the wooden box. I added some E6000 on the ends and attached my last tile. I then followed up with a piece of masking tape, and I did add a few more around my planter. Now that I'm done, I'm setting it aside and letting it set up for a couple of hours. I'm adding a simple base onto my planter, and I'm using 6 of the tumbling tower blocks from the Dollar Tree. I'll be attaching them on the bottom of the planter, but before I do, I'm showing you how I'm attaching one in each corner. I used my E6000 and attached them to the side and the corners of the tiles. I'm adding a lightweight flower pot to my planter, but if you're looking for something a little more secure, you can add an additional tile onto the bottom. If you do end up adding a tile, make sure to drill a couple of small holes through it so that you have drainage. I'm now using my last 2 blocks, and I'm attaching them to 2 on the bottom. I let my planter set up overnight, and now I'm adding in a small flower pot that I had on hand. As another option, you can also use the small drawer from the wooden box that we used at the beginning. I added in my pot and then filled it with some pretty blue flowers and some greenery. Now that I'm done, I can use my tile planter indoors or outdoors. Getting started, I'm using one of the wooden easels from the Dollar Tree, and I found this in the crafting department. I'm using some white acrylic paint, and I'm giving mine a complete coat. Now that the paint has dried, and to give my easel a bit of a rustic appearance, I'm using a piece of sandpaper, and I'm just sanding down all of the edges. This step is completely optional. You can always leave it with a fresh coat of paint. For the shelf in my planter, I'm using one of the small Dollar Tree wooden pallets. And just like the easel, I used my white acrylic paint and I gave it a coat. To support the shelf on the easel, I'm using 3 of the tumbling tower blocks from the Dollar Tree, and I painted those white as well. To attach the pieces together, I'm first turning my easel over and I'm working on the back. I placed about a 2-inch line of hot glue on the bottom edge. I then placed the thin side of the tumbling tower block side by side. Once they're both attached, it makes a small shelf on the back. To attach the palette, I'm turning it over and I'm placing some hot glue on one end. I'm then attaching the thin side of the tumbling tower block, making sure that it overlaps the end just a bit. To attach the palette, I'm adding some hot glue to those first two tumbling tower blocks and attaching it in place. To attach the back, I'm placing some hot glue on the block, placing it against the easel leg, and then making sure it sits level. To frame my easel, I'm using a 5x7 brown Dollar Tree frame. I turned it over and I removed the backing, the paper insert, and the glass, and I just put that away and I might use it later in another project. There are some little tabs on the back of the frame, so I used my clippers and removed all four. My frame is plastic, but it has a nice pressed-in wood grain. I really want that to pop, so I placed some of my white acrylic paint on the end of my foam paintbrush and added it to all four sides. As soon as I was done and before the paint had a chance to set up, I used a dry paper towel and I wiped down all four of the sides. It gave the frame a bit of a whitewashed appearance, but what I really loved was it made that wood grain come to life. When it dried, I placed some hot glue on the front of my easel and attached it in place. I then added on some hot glue to attach the top. As the planter pot, you can use anything you'd like. I'm going to use one of these little glass bowls. They come as a set of 4 and I found them at the Dollar Tree in the kitchen department. For my plants, I'm using 2 different succulents from the Dollar Tree, and I'm also using a few stems off of this boxwood branch. Before I added the plants, I first placed the bowl onto the pallet shelf. I added in some hot glue and placed my tallest succulent in the back. I then placed some in the front and added in my next succulent. From there, I added in some more hot glue and placed in the sprigs of boxwood. I added the sprig onto the front and then one on both sides. These are the plants that I chose for my project, but you can pretty much use anything you'd like and even add in a pop of color. I want to accent the outside of the frame, so I'm cutting 2 more sprigs of the boxwood. I'm placing mine diagonally across from each other, so I added some hot glue on the lower corner and attached the boxwood. I then added some hot glue to the top corner of my frame and added the rest of my greenery. With everything in place, it's now complete and ready to display. This planter will work great on a tiered tray or anywhere that you'd like to tuck in a little greenery. This is super easy to make. I found this round glass candle holder at the Dollar Tree, and it reminds me of one of those nautical rope balls. I'm adding in a Dollar Tree succulent, and the top part measures about 4 inches in height. I trimmed off the stem short enough to fit in the holder, and I also made sure that the bottom was completely flat. I added some hot glue into the well, placed in the succulent, and held it until it set up. Now that it's set up in place, I'm going to use some of these white rocks that I picked up at the Dollar Tree to fill in around the plant. I added in some hot glue and then tucked in the rocks. You can find different colors and sizes of tea light candle holders at the Dollar Tree, and this is a super easy planter hack. I also think these would make really cute baby or bridal shower favors, or even for a wedding. You can make them ahead of time and you don't have to worry that the plants will die. I'm making 2 of the easiest outdoor planters by using 2 of the plastic pencil holders from the Dollar Tree. I'm placing live plants in mine, so for drainage, I drilled 3 holes in the bottom of each. I'm raising mine up so the water can drain out, and I'm using 6 soda caps. The 3 white are from Polar Soda, and the 3 gray are from my absolute favorite, Diet Pepsi. You can also use caps from water bottles, and those will work great too. To help the pieces of plastic attach together, I'm using some sandpaper and I'm just roughing up the tops of the bottle caps. To attach them, I'm using my E6000, adding some to the top of each cap and placing them on the bottom of the pencil holder. I made sure the caps were evenly spaced on the bottom and then let the planters set up overnight. I added some rocks from outside for drainage and then placed in some whitened patience from my local garden center. And because they're all plastic, they're perfect for outdoors. Here we are at the end of the video. I know it was a long one, and I just wanted to say thank you again for hanging out with me. I hope I inspired you to make a few for your home, and if you're new here and you've made it to the end of this 2-hour-plus video, please be sure to hit that little red subscribe button. My wish is that you have a safe and an amazing day, and until next time, bye everybody!